For me, one of the most important lessons we can take from Batman is how to deal with our negative emotions. The world of Batman the Animated Series in particular is full of wounded, broken people that have been pushed over the edge by their feelings of despair and loss. It's what makes so many of them great villains. We can see why they feel the way they do, and we might even empathise with some of them, but it's their inability to overcome their negative feelings that makes them villainous. Meanwhile, our titular hero shows us how to take life's lemons and make lemonade. Yeah, I know, it's a particularly lukewarm take that the Batman is as mentally unwell as the villains he fights against, but the thing that I believe separates him from his foes is the way he handles his feelings of despair. Let's take the classic BTAS episode I Am the Night, in which Batman struggles with his feelings of apathy. The episode opens with a gloomy Batman sitting on a stone throne, how long has that been there? Expressing that his mission to save Gotham is becoming increasingly futile. These feelings of despair are compounded by the fact that it's the anniversary of his parents' murder, and even in his attempts to quietly mourn his loss, crime never sleeps and he is forced to intervene. While he was busy preventing a small-time thief from being assaulted, the police go ahead with a raid, which turns out to be a setup, and in the confusion, Commissioner Gordon gets shot. Batman, of course, blames himself. Being the man that is famously prepared for anything, he struggles to deal with his feelings of guilt when things don't go the way he had planned. And how does Batman respond to these negative feelings? He smashes up his equipment and screams into the darkness of the Batcave. Now, I've talked about this previously, but rage is a secondary emotion. It's something we feel as a result of a deeper underlying emotion. Sure, Batman is upset that his friend has been hurt, and he's disappointed in himself for not being able to be in two places at once. But ultimately, I think that the root of his anger is his feelings of powerlessness.
Jim Gordon's the same age my father would have been if he hadn't. Now he's hanging by a thread.
Batman clearly blames himself for Gordon getting shot, much in the same way that he blames himself for his parents' deaths. This feeling of blame brings to the surface his old childhood traumas, making him doubt himself and wallow in his cave for 3 days. And I have to wonder if these 3 days of lurking in a cave is some sort of biblical reference, possibly likening Batman to Christ? I don't know. Anyway, self-doubt takes hold and Batman withdraws from the world, at least until the man who attempted to kill Commissioner Gordon escapes from prison and Batman sets out to capture him, and saves Commissioner Gordon's life in the process. Batman's faith in his mission is restored and everything goes back to normal. The subplot about the small-time thief also rears its head again. After Batman dropped him off at the homeless shelter, Wizard hit rock bottom and decided to leave Gotham and start a new life elsewhere. This shows Batman that his actions can have a big impact, not just for important people like Commissioner Gordon, but for the normal, everyday people of Gotham. It would have been a decent enough end to the episode if Batman felt proud of himself for saving Gordon. But ending on the note that he also saved the life of Wizard reminds him, and us, the audience, of the value of his mission to make the world a better place, one person at a time. Now, I don't think that I Am the Night is one of the best episodes, but it has taught me a lot about handling negative feelings in life. It's okay to have a bad reaction to setbacks and disappointment. Maybe sometimes it's completely appropriate to throw your computer into the abyss. But that initial negative reaction cannot be your only reaction. Ultimately, the only thing we can do is pick ourselves up and get back to work. This is the fundamental difference between Batman and many of his rogues. There are people that have been crushed by the hand life has dealt them, and instead of dusting themselves off and moving on, they stay in that initial state of despair, lashing out at everyone around them. Take for instance Andrea Beaumont, known as the Phantasm, even though no one ever really calls her that. She is a really great parallel to Batman. Her whole story arc is very similar to Batman's, in that she's motivated by her sense of powerlessness and loss. Both of her parents died, her mother taken away by some illness, and later her father murdered by the mob while she was out shopping for groceries. The fact that she wasn't there for her father when Jack Napier arrived at their door, that she arrived moments after his murder and froze in horror at the realization of what had just happened, fills her with guilt and feelings of loss. After all, Andrea had given up on her chance of happiness with Bruce because of her father's shady business dealings, and now it turns out she threw away her relationship for nothing. She was quite content to have given up on her dream life so long as her father was safe, but with him being brutally murdered, it just underscores her overall feelings of loss.
They took everything, Bruce. My dad, my life, you. Look what they did to us! What we could have had! They had to pay!
Of course, she could have returned to Gotham and gone back to Bruce, who doubtlessly would have welcomed her back with open arms. But that wouldn't satisfy Andrea. This anger at the world, and I think some anger with herself, ate away at her, driving her to seek revenge. I think that anger at herself is why she won't allow herself to settle down with Bruce. She doesn't think she deserves happiness, and instead inflicts a lonely life of violence upon herself. Even after killing most of the men responsible for her father's death, Andrea found no peace, and would go on as the Phantasm for presumably the rest of her life, as we see her in the Batman Beyond era. Loss is a recurring theme among many of Batman's greatest foes. The BTAS version of Mr. Freeze is another great example of someone struggling with loss, and I'm sure you all know his backstory already because enough people have talked about it. But following the incident that led to his creation, and believing his wife to be dead, Mr. Freeze claimed to be dead to all emotion and sought revenge on the heartless industrialist responsible for his loss. This was complete nonsense, of course. Mr. Freeze was anything but dead to emotion. It's true that his emotional range was severely limited, but he clearly felt negative emotions like anger and despair. Even when learning that his wife was not quite as dead as he had thought, Freeze recluses himself to the furthest point away from civilization, until civilization found its way to him and unleashed his wrath. After the events of Sub-Zero, in which his wife Nora is saved, Freeze finds some peace even though he can't be with her. And I really like how one of the final shots of the film mirrors the final shot of Heart of Ice, except the emotions are completely the opposite. Knowing she is alive and well is enough for him, giving him some closure, which is pretty rare among Batman villains. At least until the new Batman Adventures era, where we learn that his frozen form has broken down, leaving him as only a head in a jar, operating a mechanized body. This loss of his physical form, combined with the loss of his wife, motivates Freeze to take his frustrations out on others, taking their most beloved things from them in order to share his pain. I never really felt like this was a particularly compelling motivation for Mr. Freeze, which is probably why they killed Nora off again in the tie-in comic Batman Adventures Continue. Mr. Freeze is arguably at his best when he is a sad, angry zombie snowman perpetually stuck in a state of loss. It's not until the time of Batman Beyond that we see Mr. Freeze again, still existing as a head in a jar buried away in the basement of Wayne Powers. This whole section of Freeze's story is a little bit convoluted, but I'll try and summarise it now. Mr. Freeze is used as a guinea pig for an experimental treatment for those whose bodies have been mutated by radiation, like the dastardly Derek Powers. Powers' plan is to clone himself a new body, edit out the mutated cells, and then transfer his mind to this new body. But he needs to trial it first. Enter Mr. Freeze, and for a while it looks like the nightmare is over. Unfortunately, it's not long until his body starts to show signs of reverting, so Powers wants to dissect him to learn what went wrong. Freeze escapes from the betrayal of his new love interest, Dr. Lake, and enacts his revenge by donning a new version of his armour, freezing her and Powers before blowing up the whole facility, with him still inside of it. So when faced with the prospect of losing his humanity again, and having been betrayed by someone he cared for, Mr. Freeze opts to blow himself up, along with the people that wronged him. I think that Freeze's feelings of betrayal and anger are justified, but he responds with an act of malice, taking an undisclosed number of people with him, and that's never excusable. It's easy to feel sorry for yourself or to lash out at the world when you feel like you've been wronged, but I think that BTAS shows us that there's a better way to be. The path of compassion. Compassion for others, and compassion for yourself.